Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome to Cougar Share. I'm Nathaniel. This is Coping with Sadness and Depression. Hopefully this is where you're meant to be at. Welcome everybody online as well. Let us know if you can't hear us, if there's any technical difficulties. Yoselina's at the computer monitoring the chat, so feel free to connect with us that way. But yeah, I'm glad you're all here. Thank you very much for coming and supporting. We're going to talk for the next hour and a half-ish today. Really just all about coping with sadness, coping with depression, right? I hope that when you leave here, you'll have the tools to really care for yourself when you're going through depressive periods, as well as caring for other people when they may be going through depressive periods. If you give me the next slide, please. We're going to talk about like trends first off, just like at APU in general, and then we're going to dive into like the actual what you should do when you feel depressed kind of thing. I'm going to try to give you a lot of tools. We're going to get in small groups and talk about those a little bit. Then we're going to go to the where you can look for more support. You can go to the counseling center. The last point is basically an ad. I'm going to do an ad for the counseling center and then hopefully follow everybody. I'm tripping over tables while I'm walking. Next slide, please. So logistically speaking, many of you may be here for soda credits or because your professor said you should come for extra credit or whatever it is that you are here for. Maybe you just love being here. You love the sound of my voice. That's great too. But if you need your attendance verified for any reason, please make sure you stay all the way to the end and fill out our survey at the end with your name and your email. That way we can make sure to give you whatever attendance credits that you need verified. If you are here for SONA credits in particular, please make sure you're signed up on the SONA system, because otherwise I'll know you were here, but I won't necessarily know that you need SONA credits, right? So make sure you are signed up in the SONA system so we can grant those. And if you have any questions or anything, just email me, nfernandez@apu.edu. Any questions you got, we'll be happy to answer them. So just generally, please be nice to each other. We're not going to be talking about deep, dark secrets about anybody's like mental health today. That's not the goal of this, right? But we do invite you to interact with each other a little bit. So when we get into small groups, please just introduce yourselves, respect each other's boundaries. Also, we're talking about depression here. That might occasionally be overwhelming for somebody. Maybe you've had some specific experiences with these things. That's cool. Just take a break if you need to. Also, if you're in the room here and you need to take a break and use the restrooms are right outside this door, just over here on my right side, or left side, I guess. Those of you online, I don't know where your restrooms are, but hopefully you do know where they are. When we go to breakout rooms, just go ahead and turn your cameras on. Obviously, when we're in the lecture here, you don't got to put yourself out there like that. But when we get to our small groups, please go ahead and turn your cameras and mics on. I think that's what I wanted to cover on this side. Yeah. Okay. Next slide, please. So let's just start off with kind of a small group exercise here. Let's get into groups, 3 or 4 people around you. We're going to open up breakout rooms online as well. And I start by introducing each other to each other, right? What's your name, maybe what's your major or whatever. And then I want us to talk about this question, like, how is sadness and depression talked about at APU? How have you heard other people talk about it? How you talk about it? What are some of the good, healthy things? What are some of the more challenging things? Just get kind of a vibe on how everybody's previous experience here at APU, okay? So I know that we're an open enrollment institution, not necessarily all of you identify as Christian. That's totally good, right? I'm excited for however you identify. But within like the Christian context, we know that like the shortest verse, right, in the whole Bible is Jesus wept, right? This is in John here. This is a different translation. Jesus began to weep. But Jesus wept is another, like, a more terse translation, right? And it has the privilege of being the shortest verse in the Bible. And I think that I like to bring that up because we talked about already, like, this is a normal human experience, right? If Jesus is doing this thing and the whole point of Jesus is perfectly God, perfectly human, right? Then we know that it's not something that we can avoid all the time, right? And oftentimes we make ourselves a lot more trouble when we're trying to deal with our depression, when we're trying to deal with our sadness, and we try and never be sad, right? If you try to be always happy, if you try and only focus on those positive emotions, if you try and shut down anytime you don't feel good, right? And so I would strongly encourage you to believe that like it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be depressed, right? You can come out of it, right? And God will be with us when we come out of it as well. And you will also have with you all of the tools that I'm going to teach you today. And hopefully those will be helpful. Obviously, not as helpful as God's inspiration for us, but a little bit more tangible sometimes, maybe. Next slide, please. So I want to start off with when I say that depression, sadness, they're super common for everybody. Everybody's going to experience them, right? I want to also say that while we will all experience them, there's different levels that you're going to feel, right? Obviously, sometimes you can be more sad, less sad, right? And when we talk about sadness and depression, usually sadness is just the general emotion, right? And then when we use the word depression, we're oftentimes talking about sadness taken to an extreme, right? And so we talk about it in psychology terms as clinical distress or functional impairment. But you don't really need to memorize those words. This isn't a psychodiagnostics class, right? This is a applied workshop. So you can think about it like if somebody goes through a breakup, right? We have Rosaline's character here as just got broken up with, and she doesn't know what she's going to do with her life, right? Very dramatic, very sad. We often have to have these big emotions right after major life events, right? But we know too that sadness typically passes, right? You typically, after some time, can get over a breakup or something like that, right? This would be different than something more intense, right? Where John here's talking about his friend that hasn't been eating, hasn't been picking up her phone, hasn't been going to class for like a month, right? So depressed to the point where your basic life functions are being impaired. That's when we're really starting to talk about depression. That's when we're really starting to get worried. And that's when we should really try and do something to break out of those cycles, whether it's we're doing it for ourselves or whether we're helping other people do it. Another slide, please. Another example, right? Somebody might fail an exam and feel totally hopeless, right? But you go out with your friends that weekend, you bounce back, you have a good time, whatever, and that hopelessness doesn't stick with you, right? Versus that would be sort of normal sadness versus like a depression where that hopelessness, it sticks and it stays. And something like, I'm useless, I'm hopeless, nobody cares about me, I shouldn't exist, things like that, right? That deepness of the hopelessness, that's what again is separating your sadness and your depression. Next slide, please. So why does this matter? I mean, for one point that it matters is, I want to show you statistics in some other presentations that I've done as well. But one of the reasons that this matters is because like over the last 12 months, like 91% of APU students have felt overwhelmed at some point. 88% have felt exhausted. And you see that these are kind of increasing in intensity, right? Very sad, lonely, anxious, hopeless, depressed, and even suicidal, right? So we have 45% of people in the last 12 months endorsing some amount of depression, and 13% of folks endorsing at least once in the last 12 months they've thought about suicide, right? The severe indicator of depression. There's probably about 30 folks online. There's probably about 20 some odd folks of you in here. 50 total, that's 5 of us in this room, right? Start doing some rough rounding, right? So these problems really exist, and they're something that I'm sure you're running into day by day, right? And if you're not running into them day by day, right, it's not gonna be every day, right? But at least at some point you're gonna run into it for yourself or somebody else, right? And so we need to do something about this. We need to have some tools for you all. Next slide, please. So let me branch into my whole toolbox thing. I've been giving you a lot of intro. Let me give you some more tools. The idea when I say toolbox is that y'all have some ways of coping with sadness, right? Y'all in here somewhere probably between, I don't know, 17 and 35 or something like that. Y'all have lived lives up until now, right? You've all developed some skills already, right? And so it's useful whenever we can to have as many tools in our quote unquote toolbox as we possibly can. And those tools are going to look different for different people, right? Some people are going to be like, when I get depressed, like I work out a lot, right? Or when I get depressed, like I have to go meditate. Or when I get depressed, I have to go X, Y, or Z, right? So while I'm going to be teaching you tools today, I don't want to pretend like these tools are like things you've never thought of before or the only way that you could possibly cope, right? I hope that they're new. I hope that they're useful to you. But I also want to reinforce that the things that you already know can be really useful to you. The problem is when we're depressed, what are some major symptoms of depression? Some major symptoms are sleepiness, fatigue, lack of motivation, lack of interest, right? All of these kinds of things that are going to make you basically not do the stuff that would make you feel better, right? And so I want us to think right now, next slide, please. Think before I even get started here, what are some of the things that you like to do for yourself that help you feel better, right? What, and maybe even jot them down. I gave you some pieces of paper a minute ago, or if you have your own notes app, or I don't know, whatever you want to do. But jot some things down that are things that you like to do, that you find useful to you, right? The reason that I want you to do this, and you can also look at, I gave you a list of pleasant activities. It's a very old, outdated list, so like I ain't gonna lie, like you probably won't want to do like 90% of those things on there. But if you can't think of nothing, you can look at those boxes in the pleasant activities list. So I'll keep talking while you keep thinking about that, right? So next slide, please. The idea is, oh, sorry, one more slide, please. The idea behind this is why I'm asking you to do this. Think about your toolbox. Think about your pre-existing activities, techniques, things that can help you. It's because if we think about depression from a behavioral psychology point of view, behavioral psychology is one of the main ones. You probably had to take an intro to psychology class. You had to learn about like Pavlov and his dogs or whatever, B.F. Skinner and the little like pigeons pecking the reward plate, right? Behaviorism, the whole idea is that we are happy when we get positive reinforcement from our environments. That makes us feel good. But sometimes those positive reinforcements, they break down for one reason or another, right? So it could be like maybe some of you are new first years, right? And you're just here in Azusa for the first time. You moved from out of state, you moved from out of country, right? And you're here in a brand new space, a brand new culture. All of your friends from high school aren't around, right? From a behaviorist point of view, that's going to mean that you don't have the same like fun hangouts that you used to have with all of your friends. You don't have the same comforts that you used to be established back in your hometown, right? And so now you might start feeling depressed, right? Because you don't have that good coming in the way that you used to, right? Or maybe it's not a first year thing, right? Maybe it is that like we're really overloaded academically, right? I would imagine that's not something that's uncommon to all of you all, especially this is week 10, I think. You probably just finished up your midterms, or you're probably just about to finish them up, right? I hope you all did very well on them. If you didn't, that's okay too. I hope you all will do wonderful on your finals. But this academic overload, right? We oftentimes spend a lot more time doing our work. And then when we start spending all that time, we stop hanging out with our friends. We stop practicing our self-care. We stop doing whatever it is that we typically used to do that made us feel happy. And now all of a sudden we're going to get depressed. This can be like thought of as like a grief thing too, right? If somebody passes away and we start to feel depressed, right? We start to feel sad after someone passes away. We could see that very easily by we don't get to connect with that person on a day-to-day basis anymore. And that's, I'm not talking like eschatologically, I'm not talking about religiously, right? I just mean in a day-to-day physical sense. We don't get to have the presence of that person in our life, right? And that can lead to depression. That's why, from a behaviorist point of view, you're going to get sad, you're going to get depressed when you're grieving, right? Then we get this snowball problem, right? Then when we stop doing the things that we like to do, we get even less reinforcement, right? And the less reinforcement I have, the less hope I'll have, the less energy I'll have, the less willingness I'll have to go out and do something, and I'm going to get more depressed. And then I'm going to stop doing even more stuff to make myself feel better, and more and more and more and more, until you have this giant snowball rolling down a hill that's crashing through everything, and you find yourself clinically depressed, right? And so The way out of that, as it were, which I will finally circle back to our toolbox, I will finally circle back to our pleasant activities, right? The way out of that from a behaviors point of view is just go do something, right? It's called behavioral activation. That's the psychology word for it. But it's basically force yourself to go do something that you would do when you were happy, right? Even if you're depressed, even if you don't feel good when you do it, if you force yourself to do that thing, or if you tell your friend, please help force me to do it, right? Because maybe you can't do it on your own, but your friend comes, drags you out of the house, right? And makes you go do whatever it is that makes you feel better, right? That will potentially reactivate that cycle. And you'll start to get some reinforcement from there. Even though you won't feel better right away, you'll start to feel a little bit of something. And then maybe with that little bit of something, you'll have the energy to push yourself to do one more thing. And the energy to push yourself to do one more thing, one more thing. And then now we have, instead of a terrible snowball, right? Now we have a good snowball, like an Olaf or something. Do people still watch Frozen? Is that still a movie that like? Okay, my daughters are in love with Frozen right now. My 3-year-old, she runs around and says Elsa powers, and like I have to freeze, like she's like totally frozen me, otherwise she yells at me. So I'm not the boss of my house. My 3-year-old is. But that idea of like, if we can get this snow going, but it's good snow, it's let it go snow, right? Then we can have this opportunity to really challenge our depression, really challenge our sadness, and start to make some positive gains, right? And so that's the first tool that I want to let you know about today, behavioral activation. Think about the tools that are in your toolbox. Think about these pleasant activities that I've given you if you can't think of nothing. And what can you do to break the cycle? Next slide, please. Oh, I want to talk about this a little bit. Some more tips on behavioral activation. It's good to vary them up a little bit, right? Because sometimes, sometimes maybe it would be really good for us to be around people, right? Some social support seeking, some being around your friends, right? Well, it's 2 a.m. and you're depressed, right? That's going to be a hard ask, right? It's not going to be that many friends that, pick up that text message that you send them, right? And so sometimes it's useful to have maybe internal things, right? What can I do for myself? Even if it's simple things like go take a shower, different things like play guitar, different, whatever. Don't play it too loud. I guess if it's 2 a.m, you kind of hear something. But like something that's internal that you can do yourself, as well as something that's maybe external, right? Where you can socially do it with other people. Maybe you need some things that are high energy, excitement. I don't know, go on a roller coaster or something. Go to like a Knott's Scary Farm, right? I think it's still running for another few days. I think it runs through this weekend. Oh, it ends tomorrow night. Okay, if you haven't gone, get to Knott's pretty quick. Yoselin knows when these dates are. So that maybe something high energy, exciting, right? Versus maybe something low energy, right? Maybe you can't get yourself all the way up to high energy. You need some like low energy activities, right? So when you think about your toolbox, when you think about behavioral activation, try and have a mix of activities that can be used in different situations and in different moods where you can still carry them out, right? And even just baby steps can be really useful, right? Just the tiniest thing. Get up and wash your face. Get up and eat something, right? Eat a cookie, right? I don't know what it is, right? Leave your bed for the first time in 3 days, right? I don't care what it is, but sometimes you have to make those really tiny steps, right? Because especially when we have this large momentum going negatively, we have to do little tiny steps before we get the ball rolling back the other way and starting to move in a positive direction. So even baby steps are useful. Everybody feeling good on behavioral activation? Okay, great. Let me talk about the second technique. My second technique comes from cognitive therapy. So there's a handout on this as well. Yoselin, if you could share it in the chat for folks, you already did. Perfect. And this is the second handout that they gave you all in person. Rational challenging comes from more of a cognitive behavioral therapy position, right? So in behaviorism, all I was talking about with behavioral activation is like what you do and the rewards or punishments that you get from your environment, right? Well, we know that we're not just like robots, right? We know that we have thoughts as well as feelings, right? We don't just behave randomly. Like we think about things and we consider things, and the way that we think about things can heavily influence how we feel about them, right? So from this perspective, from more a cognitive perspective, when we get depressed, it's because we're thinking about things in an unhelpful way. right? So if we have a bad breakup, right, like I said before, you might say from behavioral expectation, oh, I don't have a partner anymore, so now I feel sad, right? But if I talk about it from a cognitive expectation, I can say, I have a bad breakup and I go, hey, her loss, I'm awesome, right? I'm going to go out there, you know, there's many other fish in the sea, et cetera, right? I'm not going to feel nearly as sad as I would if I was like, oh no, they were my soulmate. They were my one and only. I'll never be happy again. There are zero other fish in the sea, right? Like that vibe is going to obviously cause you to be more or less depressed based on how you view it, right? Another thing, right? If we talk about failing an assignment, right? If we're failing an assignment, then if we say, "Oh no, this is the worst. I'm going to fail all my classes. I'm never going to amount to anything. I'm going to end up kicked out of school, and I'm going to be worthless, and I'll be forever uneducated." Right? Okay, I feel terrible. Oh man, I missed that quiz. Let me get that next quiz next week, right? And I'm going to feel a lot of it in a different way about it. So when we talk about these things, it's important not to view things pessimistically or negatively, right? But you're saying like there's plenty of those people like I didn't care about her anyways. I'm not sad. I'm not sad. I'm totally not sad, right? You know, that person's sad, right? You know, and but we see that as a response that some people make, right? And sometimes people make that response because they're trying to think overly optimistically. Right? There's this thing called toxic positivity that maybe you run into sometimes. Some of your friends, it's just always smiling all the time, right? You know, and so it's very important to talk about when we talk about cognitive therapies that we don't want to say, hey, stop looking at things pessimistically. Let's start looking at them optimistically. That's not going to be useful to you, right? Because then you end up denying feelings that you're really feeling. Then you start getting mad at yourself for like not being optimistic enough, right? So we're not trying to, in cognitive therapy, say a bad thing is a totally good thing, right? But it's like the analogy of a glass, right? When somebody says a pessimistic person says the glass is half empty, and an optimistic person says the glass is half full. Well, the engineer says the glass is 50% bigger than it needs to be, right? You know, that's just a statement of fact about the glass, right? That's what we're trying to go for in cognitive therapy. We're trying to go for a rational engagement with our situation that doesn't underplay negative things that happen, but avoids overplaying as well, right? And that's where we want to seek ourselves. And so that would be the same, like if we make a decision we regret, right? And you're feeling really bad about that. Well, if you feel bad about that, like you're an awful person and you'll never do anything ever good again, right? Then that's not so good. But if you say, I make a decision that I regret and I go, that's okay. Actually, it was an awesome decision, right? That's a terrible plan too, right? But if we look at it rationally, if we look at it the way a cognitive therapist would encourage us to look at it, we would say, hey, I messed up, but people mess up. I need to do better in the future. How can I make myself do better in the future instead of just spiraling on this current situation that I find myself in, right? And that's what we're looking for when we're trying to talk about cognitive therapy. And the way that we do that is called rational challenging, right? So we basically can try and push ourselves to ask ourselves questions about what it is that we're stressed with, about what it is that we're thinking, to try and challenge, you know, some unhelpful thinking strategies we might have. Next slide, please. So that's, like I said, it's not pessimistic or optimistic, it's realistic. But you'll find that you might be prone to certain negative automatic thoughts. On that paper I gave you, sorry, I keep stepping around. On that paper I gave you, there should be like several, like jumping to conclusions, all or nothing thinking, right? There's a whole bunch of things in boxes, right? You're going to have tendencies when you get stressed out, and everybody's tendencies are going to be a little bit different, right? I might be a very much all or nothing kind of person. You might be a very much a discounting the positives kind of person, right? Actually, to give a real example, I'm more of a should or must person. I think that's in like the bottom right corner of that. Like I always have unrealistic demands on myself, right? Albert Ellis, who's a psychologist that thinks he's funny, used to introduce the joke. You're shoulding all over yourself right now, right? You got to stop demanding so much out of yourself. You got to have more realistic expectations of yourself, right? So you may have struggle with any number of these automatic thoughts, or maybe just one or two, or maybe you run the whole gamut. Maybe you can nail them all. But if we could be aware of ones that we are typically using, if we could be aware of the ones that we're drawn to in moments of stress, then we can be vigilant for those. We can notice them and try and cut them off of the past, right? And try and ask ourselves questions to make ourselves not so stressed out, not so affected by the various things that are going on. And so on the back of that sheet, I have some questions that you ask yourself, some challenging questions, basically. Like you could take your thought and like pretend like you're the lawyer for the other side, right? You're having this thought and you're saying that it's true and you believe it, right? That's why you're having that thought. Well, now we got to interrogate that thought. We got to cross-examine that thought a little bit. We got to see if we can notice where we are maybe committing some of these logical fallacies and where we could view things a little bit more realistically, not super optimistically, but challenge the pessimism that's driving us towards depression instead of just feeling the normative sadness. I encourage you to set yourself up to watch for those things. Maybe some of you are journalers, right? You know, when you're journaling, take a look back at what you wrote. Did you see any real distortions there? Maybe some of you aren't journalers. Maybe you should start journaling a little bit so you see your words out in front of you, right? And do those words seem like they make sense or not, right? Maybe you talk it out with a friend if you're not practiced at doing it yourself yet, noticing where you would be saying something is a little bit distorted. One of my favorite interventions to do when I'm working with students in therapy, right, is to say, you know, if your friend told you that, what would you say to them, right? Because we oftentimes have automatic thoughts and criticism of things that are so negative towards ourselves, right? But if we were hearing the same thing from our best friend, we'd be naturally trying to build them back up, right? So that could be another great way of challenging, in addition to some of the challenging questions that you have on the back of that sheet already, right? Okay, we're chugging right along. Next slide, please. The last tool I want to give you today, this is our third one, is based on mindfulness, right? So I told you in behavioral interventions, right, we just need to push ourselves forward. We need to behaviorally activate. You know, in cognitive therapies, right, we just need to change the way we're thinking. We need to not get busted up in thinking traps, right? We need to just change that, right? All of these are associated with change, right? And so sometimes those are really good, right? Especially if there's very easy things you can do to get yourself active again, especially if there's very obvious thinking errors that you're making, right? Or very obvious overgeneralizations or something like that, right? But sometimes, like, we find ourselves struggling when we try and actually control what it is that we're feeling, right? Oftentimes this can be the case, right? Maybe we're feeling a little bit sad for good reason, right? You know, maybe something sad happened, you know? And so we are already doing our self-care, but it's not really making us not feel sad. We've already thought about our cognitions. They're sort of accurate, so we do feel sad, right? You know, what do we do in those cases, right? In those cases, we have to think about what's called mindfulness, right? Basically, mindfulness is the idea that we can be present, focused, non-judgmental, like just aware and in our experience, right? Everybody's probably taken at least one yoga class at some point in their life. Maybe not, but you've heard the word mindfulness before, right? All of you have probably done some kind of something where mindfulness came along, right? And the idea of mindfulness is basically like, if these were my problems, if my iPad here is my issues, right? And I am super focused on my issues at all times, right? All I am is focused on my issues, right? Like, this is weird. I have a giant iPad in front of my face. I can't see anything, right? And so if I perseverate on my issues, if I pay only attention to my issues, I'm not going to be able to interact with my life very well, right? But if I spend all my life pushing away my issues, trying to keep them away from me, I still can't see you when I look at you, right? This is still impeding my vision to you. I still can't do anything with my hands. I'm too busy pushing my problems away from me, right? And so if I'm stuck focusing all the time on my sadness, or if I'm trying never to focus on my sadness, right? Both of those things can actually impede my ability to function in life, right? Functioning in life with sadness, right? If this is my sadness iPad, if I could just hold it in one hand down to my side, right? I can interact with you all. We can have a conversation. I can gesticulate wildly like I typically do. But obviously I can only really make hand gestures with my left hand, right? Not really my right hand. I'm still holding the sadness. The sadness hasn't gone away, right? But I'm holding it differently so that I can preserve most of my ability to interact with the world, right? So that the depression, the sadness doesn't become an overwhelming issue to me that stops me from interacting with the world, right? And so we have to stop ourselves from blaming ourselves for our problems. We have to stop ourselves from perseverating on our issues all the time. We need to find a way to say, hey, I'm sad right now. That's not a good feeling. I don't like it, but I'm okay. And I can hold this down to my side. I could be sad and still go to class. I could be sad and still go out with my friends. I can be sad and I could still, cook dinner, right? Those kinds of things where I could still engage with my life while acknowledging my sadness in a non-judgmental way. Does that kind of make sense? We're not trying to solve it. Both behavioral activation and cognitive strategies are trying to solve it. This is about trying to just chill with it until it goes away, right? So how do you do that? Well, there's a million ways to do that, and they're all probably included on your favorite mindfulness app, right? Download Headspace, download Calm, download whatever, right? If you don't want to download those, because some of them cost you money, just go on YouTube and type in mindfulness, right? You're going to get a million different things, right? And a lot of those are going to be, next slide, please. A lot of those are going to be some kind of breathing exercise of one form or another. This is one breathing exercise that I want to walk you through today. This is actually something Marcelina introduced to us, our intern Marcelina. Thank you very much, Marcelina. But the idea is we're going to do a little bit of a silly thing here, right? Where you're going to place your hand on your temples here, right? I've got my index and middle finger on my temples so that I can pinch my nose basically with my thumb and my ring finger, right? A little bit odd. Why am I doing this? Well, what I'm doing is I can plug one nostril and breathe in and then switch and breathe out, right? So then I'm doing a pattern breathing in one side of my nose and out the other side of my nose. This is a little bit weird, a little bit odd, but they've done studies on this. And it's actually a really good way to lower your blood pressure, to relax, et cetera, right? And one of the reasons that it's useful for that is if you've ever just tried to do a meditation before where I just tell you to think about nothing, that's really hard to do, right? But if you're sitting here thinking about hey, what am I doing? What is this weird thing that I'm doing with my hand again? Then maybe you can focus a little bit on it more. So I will invite you to try it with me, right? Just give it a shot. If you hate it, you hate it. If you love it, you love it. But come on with me right now. Again, put your index and middle fingers sort of right here on your sinuses, just basically, just look at me and see what I'm doing. Put your thumb on your right nostril and take a big deep breath in. Switch over to your ring finger and deep breath out. Now back the other way, breathing in through your right nostril. Switching over to the other side and breathing out. We'll do this 3 more times. In, out, in, out. One last time, in and out. And feel how you feel right now. Hopefully you feel a little bit sleepy, right? Hopefully I'm putting you to sleep on a Friday afternoon, right? Hopefully you feel the tension that you're feeling go down just a little bit, right? And hopefully while we're doing this semi-silly feeling exercise, right, we're able to focus all of our attention on that and just this attention of this strange way that we're breathing. Really becoming conscious of how we're breathing rather than typically how we're not conscious, right? This is a basic mindfulness strategy. This is to take your mind off of everything that's going on and just let go, right? So you saw we did that for what, less than a minute, right? Work that in your day or work a different breathing exercise in your day. Some of you have heard of box breathing before. Some of you have heard of 5-7 before, whatever. There's a million different ways that you can do this. But I really strongly encourage you to make this part of your toolbox as well. Don't just behavioral activate. Don't just cognitively restructure. Also take time for mindfulness, right? And depending on your mood, different ones are going to work better for different people at different times. Feel good? All right. Next one. We're on our home stretch here, so this is where I get into my right? Hopefully these tools are going to be useful to you, right? And they will be useful to you, like, well, I shouldn't say that's like very guarantee language, right? Like, I don't want to overstate it, right? But hopefully you'll be able to use some of these skills and deal with your sadness, right? Cope with it. We're always going to get sad. Even Jesus got sad, right? But hopefully we can use some of these tools to help ourselves stop from getting depressed, right? Well, when do we notice that we're getting depressed? We notice that we're getting depressed when we're really unable to care for ourselves, when we're preoccupied with our concerns or overwhelmed, or when we're starting to feel dangerous to ourselves or to other people, right? Or when we just even think talking to somebody might help about this, right? In all of those situations, your probably sadness is teetering on towards that depressive side, and it's time to do something about it. And so reach out for help. Next slide, please. One place you can reach out for help, obviously, is our University Counseling Center, but we have a million other offices around campus as well. In the rare case that you or somebody you're working with is strongly depressed and is thinking about hurting themselves or other people, please do call 911 rather than, like going about these tools, right? But most of the time, we're not quite there yet, right? And most of the time, we should use these tools or call the counseling center. Next slide, please. So that's what I have for today. I thought I had a slide in here with a picture of the counseling center information. Do I have one in there? All the way at the end. This is the slide I wanted to encourage. So this is our number here, 626-815-2109. You can find it anywhere. You can find it online, find it right here. But we have a 24/7 urgent care. Call us whenever your sadness starts overwhelming you, when it starts tipping towards a depression, come check it out. We're 100% free. We're 100% HIPAA compliant, confidential, and it's like we're right here on East Campus. You can come, we're in the mods across from In-N-Out, right? So you can come walk in anytime we're open. You can just call us anytime 24/7. We do appointments over the phone or over Zoom as well. Let us help you out. You can also make appointments through your My Cougar Health app. If you go on your APU Now and go to your health hub, and you can just make an appointment online without even having to talk to anybody if you prefer to do it that way.